August 15th, 1945. Tokyo, Japan. 12:04 in the afternoon. The humid summer air hangs heavy over the Japanese capital as millions gather around radio sets across the empire. The crackle of static fills rooms where families kneel on tatami mats, their faces etched with exhaustion after 4 years of total war. In government buildings, military officers stand at rigid attention, their uniforms pressed despite the rationing of everything from rice to steel. The scent of incense drifts from household shrines where photographs of fallen sons sit beside empty rice bowls. For the first time in Japan's 2,600-year history, an emperor is about to speak directly to his people through the airwaves. A voice they had never heard from a man they considered a living god. The static clears. A high, thin voice begins to speak in the most formal Japanese dialect, words so archaic that many listeners struggle to comprehend their meaning. To our good and loyal subjects, Emperor Hirohito begins, his voice trembling slightly as he reads from a prepared script. After pondering deeply the general trends of the world and the actual conditions obtaining to our empire today, we have decided to effect a settlement of the present situation by resorting to an extraordinary measure. What follows will not only end the bloodiest conflict in human history, but cement America's position as the world's unchallenged nuclear superpower. The Emperor's words, delivered in this moment, represent the final acknowledgement that Japan's future, indeed the future of international relations, has been irrevocably altered by America's demonstration of atomic capability. The voice emanating from those radio speakers carries with it the weight of a new world order, one where the nation possessing nuclear weapons holds the ultimate diplomatic card. 9 days earlier, the world had witnessed the dawn of the atomic age. On August 6th, at 8:15 in the morning, the Enola Gay had released its cargo over Hiroshima. The uranium bomb, nicknamed Little Boy, detonated 1,900 feet above the city with the force of 15,000 tons of TNT. In a single blinding flash, 4 square miles of urban landscape vanished. Buildings that had stood for generations became shadows burned into concrete. Human beings became vapor. There only remains dark silhouettes etched onto walls and sidewalks. The lucky ones died instantly. Others would suffer radiation sickness for weeks before succumbing to this invisible killer that no Japanese doctor understood. 3 days later, Fat Man, a plutonium implosion device, obliterated Nagasaki with even greater force. The twin demonstrations of American nuclear capability sent shockwaves not just through Japanese society, but through the highest levels of Japan's military leadership. These weapons represented something beyond conventional warfare, beyond Bushido, beyond anything in the Japanese military tradition. They represented a fundamental shift in the nature of power itself. The path to this moment had been paved by American industrial might on a scale that defied Japanese comprehension. The Manhattan Project, initiated in 1942, had mobilized over 130,000 workers across the United States. At its peak, the program consumed more electricity than entire cities, employed more people than most nations' entire governments, and cost nearly $2 billion, equivalent to $27 billion today. Secret cities rose from nowhere. Los Alamos in New Mexico, Oak Ridge in Tennessee, Hanford in Washington. These were not mere factories, but entire industrial ecosystems dedicated to a single purpose: the mastery of atomic energy. In the sprawling uranium enrichment facilities at Oak Ridge, massive electromagnetic separators, called calutrons, hummed day and night, slowly concentrating uranium-235 from its more common isotope. The process required so much silver for electrical conductivity that the U.S. Treasury loaned 14,000 tons of the precious metal to the War Department. At Hanford, enormous plutonium production reactors generated artificial elements that had never existed on Earth in meaningful quantities. The scale was staggering: 9 reactor buildings, each larger than a city block, cooled by water from the Columbia River. Japanese military leaders, accustomed to fighting with diminishing resources, could barely comprehend this display of abundance. Their own atomic program had consisted of a handful of scientists working with limited materials and equipment. By 1945, Japan struggled to fuel its remaining aircraft, while America was casually transmuting elements and building cities from scratch solely to produce weapons of unimaginable power. The psychological impact of the atomic bombs on Japan's leadership revealed the vast chasm between expectation and reality that had defined their wartime experience. When Japan launched its attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, military planners believed they could force America into a negotiated settlement through decisive early victories. They calculated that the soft, materialistic Americans would lack the will for prolonged conflict in the Pacific. This fundamental misreading of American character and capability would prove catastrophic. General Hideki Tojo and the military leadership had envisioned a quick war, 6 months to establish a defensive perimeter, then negotiations from a position of strength. They saw America as a nation grown complacent through prosperity, unable to match the spiritual fervor of Japanese soldiers who were prepared to die for emperor and empire. The attack on Pearl Harbor was designed to be so devastating that American morale would crumble, forcing President Roosevelt to seek peace terms. Instead, the Japanese discovered they had awakened an industrial colossus. Within months of Pearl Harbor, American shipyards were launching vessels faster than Japan could sink them. The Liberty ships that poured from American assembly lines represented mass production on an unprecedented scale. 1 ship every 8 hours at peak production. American factories that had produced automobiles seamlessly converted to tank production. The arsenal of democracy, as Roosevelt called it, was not merely rhetoric, but a practical reality that Japanese military planners had fatally underestimated. By 1943, the disparity had become undeniable. While Japanese forces fought desperately to hold scattered Pacific islands with dwindling supplies, American forces arrived with overwhelming material superiority. Japanese soldiers, trained to revere the sword as the soul of the warrior, found themselves facing enemies equipped with unlimited ammunition, air support, and provisions. Where Japanese troops counted every rifle round, Americans unleashed artillery barrages that consumed more shells in a single day than Japan could produce in a month. The atomic bombs represented the ultimate expression of this industrial disparity. Where Japan's atomic research consisted of theoretical discussions among university professors, America had transformed scientific theory into devastating reality. The uranium for Little Boy had been separated atom by atom in facilities that consumed 3% of America's total electrical output. The plutonium for Fat Man had been created in reactors that represented entirely new forms of industrial engineering. These weapons emerged not from desperate improvisation, but from methodical application of unlimited resources to scientific problems. On the morning of August 9th, as the second atomic bomb fell on Nagasaki, Japan's Supreme War Council, the Big Six, finally convened to address the crisis. Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki, Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo, and their colleagues faced a reality that their military doctrine had never contemplated. War Minister Korechika Anami, Navy Minister Mitsumasa Yonai, Army Chief of Staff Yoshijiro Umezu, and Navy Chief of Staff Suimu Toyoda, men who had built their careers on the premise that Japanese spirit could overcome material disadvantage, now confronted weapons that rendered such thinking obsolete. The debate in those August days revealed the profound psychological transformation that American nuclear capability had imposed on Japanese leadership. Foreign Minister Togo argued that continued resistance would result in the total extinction of human civilization, language that acknowledged the atomic bomb as something beyond conventional military planning. War Minister Anami, representing the hardline military faction, initially insisted on continuing the fight, but even his arguments reflected a fundamental shift. He no longer spoke of victory, only of extracting better surrender terms through demonstration of continued resistance. The internal documents from these meetings, preserved in Japanese archives, reveal the extent to which the atomic bombs had shattered Japanese strategic thinking. Military leaders who had previously calculated acceptable casualty ratios for the defense of the home islands now discussed the possibility of national annihilation. The weapons that had obliterated Hiroshima and Nagasaki represented power beyond anything in military history, power that could not be countered by traditional tactics, spiritual preparation, or sacrificial determination. Emperor Hirohito himself, traditionally removed from military decision-making, intervened directly in the surrender debate. His private meetings with military leaders in the days after Nagasaki revealed a man grappling with the implications of weapons that could, in his words, lead to the total extinction of human civilization. The emperor, who had been raised to believe in Japan's divine destiny, now faced the practical reality that continued war could result in the complete obliteration of his people. The recording of the emperor's surrender broadcast, made on August 14th and played the following day, carries within it the weight of this psychological transformation. Hirohito's reference to a new and most cruel bomb, the power of which to damage is indeed incalculable, represents more than acknowledgement of military defeat. It represents recognition that the fundamental nature of warfare, and therefore international relations, had changed permanently. The symbolic power of this moment extended far beyond the immediate end of hostilities. Throughout the Pacific War, American abundance had served as both weapon and message, where Japanese soldiers received dwindling rations of rice and pickled vegetables. Captured American supplies revealed soldiers equipped with chocolate, cigarettes, and fresh fruit. Japanese propaganda had portrayed Americans as soft and materialistic, yet the material abundance of American forces proved to be a source of strength rather than weakness. The atomic bombs represented the ultimate manifestation of this abundance. America had not merely built these weapons, but had built the entire industrial infrastructure necessary to produce them from scratch. The sight of Hiroshima and Nagasaki reduced to radioactive rubble sent a clear message to any potential adversary. The United States possessed not just nuclear weapons, but the industrial capacity to produce them in quantities limited only by political will. In the weeks following Japan's surrender, American occupation forces arrived with supplies that further demonstrated this abundance. General MacArthur's headquarters distributed food to prevent starvation among the Japanese population, food produced by the same agricultural system that had fed American troops throughout the Pacific Campaign. The contrast was unmistakable. Japan, with its centuries-old tradition of rice cultivation, could not feed its own people, while America possessed surplus food to distribute to former enemies. The chocolate bars and chewing gum distributed by American soldiers to Japanese. Children became powerful symbols in their own right. These simple items, taken for granted in American society, represented luxuries that most Japanese civilians had not seen in years. The children who received these gifts witnessed firsthand the abundance that had made possible America's nuclear capability. The same industrial system that had separated uranium isotopes also produced candy in quantities sufficient to share with the children of defeated enemies. This demonstration of abundance extended to every aspect of the American presence in Japan. American military vehicles, with their chrome fittings and powerful engines, highlighted the technological gap that had made the atomic bombs possible. Japanese engineers, accustomed to maximizing efficiency from minimal resources, marveled at American equipment that seemed designed without regard for material constraints. The jeeps, trucks, and aircraft of the occupation forces represented the same industrial philosophy that had built atomic reactors: the application of unlimited resources to engineering problems. The reconstruction of Japan under American guidance further emphasized this transformation of power relationships. The new Japanese constitution, largely drafted by American legal experts, included Article 9, which renounced war as a sovereign right of the nation. This provision, unique among world constitutions, represented formal acknowledgement that Japan's future would unfold under American nuclear protection rather than through independent military capability. The symbolic significance of this arrangement extended beyond mere military alliance. By accepting permanent military dependence on the United States, Japan acknowledged that the atomic age had created a new hierarchy of nations. Countries without nuclear weapons would exist under the protection, or sufferance, of those that possessed them. The Emperor's surrender broadcast had initiated this new world order. The subsequent constitutional provisions made it permanent. The transformation of Japan's relationship with America from military conflict to economic partnership illustrated another dimension of nuclear diplomacy. The same industrial capacity that had produced atomic weapons now became the foundation for rebuilding Japan as a prosperous democracy. Marshall Plan aid, technological transfer, and access to American markets demonstrated that nuclear capability could be used to create as well as destroy. The choice between these alternatives would remain with the nuclear powers. The ripple effects of America's nuclear demonstration extended far beyond the Pacific. Stalin's Soviet Union accelerated its own atomic program after witnessing the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. British and French leaders recognized that their empires could not survive in a world where ultimate power rested with nuclear weapons. The colonial system that had dominated global politics for centuries began its rapid dissolution as European powers acknowledged their secondary status in the atomic age. China's Civil War, which resumed immediately after Japan's surrender, was fundamentally altered by the knowledge that America possessed weapons capable of ending the conflict with decisive intervention. Both communist and nationalist forces adapted their strategies to account for the possibility of American nuclear involvement. The eventual communist victory occurred despite, or perhaps because of, the knowledge that America's nuclear arsenal could have prevented it but remained unused. The Korean War, beginning just 5 years after Hiroshima, demonstrated both the power and the limitations of nuclear diplomacy. President Truman's decision to dismiss General MacArthur rather than authorize nuclear weapons against Chinese forces revealed that atomic capability, while ultimate, was not easily translatable into day-to-day diplomatic advantage. The weapons that had ended World War II proved too powerful for limited conflicts, creating what strategists would term the nuclear threshold, the gap between conventional military action and nuclear response. This paradox would define international relations throughout the Cold War and beyond. Nuclear weapons, by their very destructiveness, became tools of peace as much as war. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction that emerged in the 1950s and 1960s represented the logical extension of the psychology that Emperor Hirohito had grasped in August 1945. Weapons capable of destroying civilization could not be used without destroying the user as well. The technological descendants of the Manhattan Project continued to demonstrate American abundance throughout the Cold War. The space program that put American astronauts on the moon utilized the same rocket technology developed for intercontinental ballistic missiles. The civilian nuclear power industry that emerged in the 1950s represented peaceful application of the uranium enrichment and reactor technology perfected for weapons production. Even the internet, initially developed as a military communication system, reflected the abundance of resources that America could devote to technological advancement. Each of these developments reinforced the fundamental lesson of August 1945. The nation with the greatest capacity for applied scientific research and industrial production would dominate the international system. The Soviet Union's eventual collapse reflected, in part, its inability to match American investment in technological development across multiple domains simultaneously. The same abundance that had made possible the Manhattan Project enabled America to pursue military, space, and civilian nuclear programs concurrently while maintaining the world's most productive civilian economy. The Japanese children who had received chocolate from American soldiers grew up to become leaders of Japan's economic miracle of the 1960s and 1970s. Their memories of an American abundance, first witnessed in the aftermath of atomic devastation, shaped their understanding of prosperity as a foundation for national power. The Japan that emerged as America's closest Pacific ally represented living proof that nations could prosper under American nuclear protection while contributing to global stability through economic rather than military means. Today, nearly 80 years after Emperor Hirohito's surrender broadcast, the fundamental dynamics established in that moment continue to shape international relations. The nuclear club has expanded to include 9 nations, but the basic principle remains unchanged. Ultimate diplomatic leverage rests with those possessing the capability to destroy their adversaries completely. The weapons that ended World War II established not just American dominance, but the template for power relationships in the modern world. The rice that Japanese families shared in those hungry months of 1945, often supplemented by American relief supplies, carries within its memory the transformation of an empire into a peaceful democracy. Each grain represents the abundance that made possible America's nuclear capability, the scarcity that drove Japan to military aggression, and the food security that became the foundation of post-war prosperity. In the quiet moments of that August afternoon in 1945, as Emperor Hirohito's voice faded from radios across Japan, listeners understood that they were witnessing the end of one world and the beginning of another. The future had been decided not by samurai swords or kamikaze attacks, but by the patient application of scientific knowledge and industrial resources to the fundamental forces of matter itself. America's nuclear strike capability had not merely won a war, it had established the principles by which future conflicts would be deterred, limited, or resolved. The voice that spoke of enduring the unendurable and suffering what is insufferable carried within it the recognition that the atomic age had begun, and that Japan's future, like that of every nation, would unfold in the shadow of weapons that could end human civilization in a matter of hours. The Emperor's broadcast marked not just the end of World War II, but the dawn of a new form of international order, one where ultimate power rested not with the largest armies or the bravest soldiers, but with those who possessed the knowledge and resources to split the atom itself. In that moment of surrender, broadcast to a nation kneeling before radio sets, the future had indeed been decided by America's nuclear strike capability, establishing patterns of power and dependence that would define the world for generations to come.